Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we're jumping back into tier rank, 4 more subclasses introduced in Helianna's Guide to Monster Hunting.
In this video, we're going to be looking at subclasses from the Paladin all the way through to the Wizard. There's a lot of very unique and interesting subclasses that are brought to life in Helianna's Guide. And so we're going to be tier ranking them today. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
Helianna's Guide to Monster Hunting is made by the amazing team at Loot Tavern, which are one of our favorite third-party publishers creating amazing 5e content. And now, if you've been broadening your TTRPG horizons by checking out more projects by amazing independent creators, you may also want to check out the work of this week's sponsor.
Our friend Alan from Dungeon Coach has just launched their new TTRPG, DC20, over on Kickstarter.
They've created a fresh take on heroic fantasy, building on the mechanics and systems that you're familiar with, and a big thanks to them for sponsoring this episode.
Their system is based on a 4 action point turn with mana and stamina points to fuel spellcasting and martial maneuvers, plus skill challenge rules for every pillar of play, and reimagined takes on the archetypal classes you know and love.
If you've ever tinkered around with the rules of Pathfinder or D&D looking to create a more tactical and flexible system of your own, frankly, Alan has done the work for you, and it is worth checking out.
Or if you've been looking for a new rule set for fantasy tabletop role-playing that feels right for you and your group, and if you want something familiar that's still got some good crunch to it, DC20 might be the perfect system for you.
So a big thank you to Alan and the team at DC20 for sponsoring this week's episode. The links to their Kickstarter are right down below. It's just launched on the platform, so please check it out. Support other creators that are making amazing things here on YouTube. Big thanks to Alan and the whole crew at DC20 for sponsoring the episode. And now, let's get back on to talking about those subclasses.
And speaking of third-party creators, we are taking a look at Helianna's Guide, and we are using our typical ranking system. Up on screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we use to rank the subclasses. We rank them from S, A, B, C, or D. S tier is the best of the best. These are the go-to options, usually the most powerful options presented for that class, or at least one of, and sometimes maybe a little overpowered. A tier is generally the happy place that we love to see our subclasses land in. This is a powerful and potent pick for anybody, performs really well in combat, and you should definitely consider taking it.
B tier is where things start to depend a little bit more on your campaign or your build. This is where the subclass might offer some things that are pretty useful and pretty good, but your character's going to have to be a little bit focused around that, or the campaign's going to have to really support that theme or that idea. Everything here is effective. It just depends on the situation on how effective it is.
If you're looking at C tier for us is something that can be useful in niche situations. There's nothing really terrible here in the subclass, but it might not perform as well as the other options that are higher than it in most of the standard things that would be presented in a D&D game. Oftentimes, I will give a C rank for a subclass that has a lot of thematic capabilities, but might not mechanically do as well.
And the D tier is really where things don't look so good anymore. A D tier subclass usually is not offering subclass features that come into play often or at all, or might actually be detrimental to the strengths of the subclass, taking the main class in a wildly different direction that, generally speaking, you're better off not having a subclass at all.
So with all of that in mind, let's take a look at the Paladin from Helianna's Guide.
So the Paladin subclass in Helianna's is the Oath of the Harvest. This is continuing, I think, the theme that was introduced in the Bard subclass, the Culinary School, which is very, very much a subclass focused around prosperity, sharing your meal, and nurturing your community. I think there's a lot of thematic resonance here, I think, with very community focused, like Redemption Paladin. And I think this is a subclass that very much leans into sort of the healer support role of the Paladin, less so the kind of vengeance-bringing destroyer.
Yeah, this is a Paladin that is going to sit around the campfire, tell you stories, and feed you soup. Not one that's going... I mean, you'll still be smashing things with a sword, but not as angrily. Right away, you get your Oath tools at 3rd level, which is going to give you proficiency in cook's utensils. So again, we're going with that idea. I'm definitely picturing the knight handing out stew at the campfire.
That you made in your helmet.
Yeah, gross. But it also adds that je ne sais quoi.
Yeah.
To
Yeah. So Paladin subclasses, as we all know and love, follow a little bit of a pretty strict formula here. We get our Oath spells, we get our Channel Divinity, we get an Aura Enhancer of some kind, and then eventually we're going to get at level 20 some sort of like Transformation or Apotheosis ability. So our Oath spells here are going to be Heroism, Purify Food and Drink, Prayer of Healing, Warding Bond, Beacon of Hope, Create Food and Water, Death Ward, Odaluk's Resilient Sphere, Greater Restoration, and Mass Cure Wounds. This looks a lot like a Life Domain Clerics list, but with like the food spells added in.
This is a spell list that feels entirely theme. Like it's on brand. It's on theme. None of these are my favorite spells. None of these are ones. Some of them are useful in situations that might pop up, and so it's kind of cool to be like, yeah, I have the right spell for this niche thing that's happening. I don't mind having niche spells on a spell list because it implies that, hey, if this weird thing pops up, I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like to see a few big spells on a spell list as well, and I don't think there's anything here that makes me go, whoa, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think of the spells on the spell list, it's not until the higher level spells that we start to see the ones that really become useful. Death Ward is a really useful spell. Odaluk's Resilient Sphere has uses. Greater Restoration is great, but it's not necessarily always one that you need to pack along with you all the time. The earlier spells, Heroism, Warding Bond, Situational, they're not bad, but we're not really getting anything that we wouldn't get from the Paladin spell list as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or that we wouldn't be able to access in some equivalent way. So we're not really seeing an expanded capacity here, which is generally what I'm looking for out of a good Paladin spell list is spells that I want on a Paladin that I don't normally get.
I want to see it. It is a tough thing to crack, but generally you want everything to feel thematic and on brand for the type of Paladin, but also delivering spells that aren't normally on the list. Or spells that, I mean, a few spells, like, I don't mind having Purify Food and Drink and Create Food and Water on here. They feel so on brand.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't they be on here? But if you paired those with something, I can't think of an example right now, but something, I mean, Hero's Feast.
Yeah, but Hero's Feast is a 6th level spell, and we'll see how they kind of navigate that in a higher level feature. I just feel that Purify Food and Drink and Create Food and Water are such, yes, they're thematic, but so few campaigns go into the detail where those spells are ever used. Like I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen these spells cast in all my years of playing D&D across editions. And even then, it's usually like a thematic flavor thing rather than something that was essential to the party's survival. Going on to the Channel Divinity powers, we get 2 options for this. We get a Vow of Sustenance, which is a bonus action that gives someone temporary hit points equal to your charisma modifier, twice your charisma modifier at the start of each of their turns, and when you use it on them.
Because it's at the start of each of their turns, I see that as sort of a damage sponge.
Yeah.
And essentially, because you're a paladin, you have a couple options here. Most paladins might not have a +5 in charisma. This paladin might. Or if you're playing a Hexblade paladin or something of that sort, then yes, you're going to have a higher charisma. I would imagine that you're going to have anywhere from a +3 to a +5. So you're giving somebody 6 to 10 temporary hit points every turn, which is a great little shield. That'll soak up a bit of damage that they're taking. It's not going to like block a ton of attacks, but if you're in the middle of combat, every round they are taking 6 to 10 less damage if they're getting hit.
Sheer Vitality allows you to just take necrotic damage up to your current hit points. Just take it as much as you want. And then up to 4 creatures around you regain hit points equal to half however much damage you took. So if you are sitting at 100 hit points you could be like, I'm just going to take 50 necrotic damage as a bonus action. And you take that 50 necrotic damage, and 4 people that you can see each get 25 hit points. So that turns your 50 hit points into 100 hit points back.
Now, this one is extremely dependent on your party size. At our table, where we have 3 players, this almost feels like you would never want to use it.
You're just trading your hit points around because you're taking 50 damage and there's only 2 other people to heal.
I would only use it at our table if I was at near maximum hit points and my other 2 allies were near 0. Or at 0.
It's kind of like trading hit points around. But then as soon as you have a 4th or 5th party member, then you're actually able to heal everyone for that much, right?
The stock goes up as soon as, especially if you're at 5, a 5-player party, then yes, this feels much more useful. So it is an interesting option. I feel like it might be a little tricky to use.
Yeah, you have to plan carefully because ultimately, like, you are getting damage back. Like, I think that the big thing is that you want to be in a case where you're not just shuffling the hit points around.
Yeah.
Because when there's only 2 people in your party, that's all you're doing is you're removing, effectively, you're removing the damage from them and moving it to yourself with 2 players, which isn't bad, but can still be risky.
A life-saving situation.
Yeah. Whereas on the flip side, you're actually bringing more healing into the party with the 3 or 4 people.
At 7th level, we gain our aura feature, Aura of Rejuvenation. This has a few different parts to it. The first part is that you amplify the healing around you. So if a creature regains hit points from a potion, a spell, or an ability, they regain an extra 1d6 hit points. During a short rest, if they use hit die, they gain an additional hit point per hit die. It should be noted there's a little box text here that says that lay on hands does not count. So you cannot lay on hands people to trigger the extra d6 of healing.
Yeah, conceivably this is because there's a concern that you could just parcel out the smallest possible packet of lay on hands and get more d6s that way, right? So like if you're laying on hand someone for 1 hit point, then they're getting another d6. And that is an interesting thing about this feature, though, is that this feature does amp up with smaller recurrent bits of healing. So a spell like Aura of Vitality, which ticks for 2d6,
is now doing 3d6 every time. Yeah,
right? So normally, like, we see Aura of Vitality get used out of combat to restore 70 hit points. Well, when you have this Aura of Rejuvenation with Aura of Vitality out of combat, now it's doing 105 back.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an interesting combo there where you get a lot of healing out of it. The hit die feature is fine. It reminds me very much of the Bard's Song of Rest ability. The aura does get larger like all auras do. I think it's not bad. It's just an aura that is dependent on other resources being spent to activate it. And I see why that is, because like there's a party that goes, okay, well, what if it was just a passive healing aura that was constantly healing everybody? And that type of thing can be very easily abused. It's hard to make an ability like that that's balanced. But I think this could have had a little more oomph.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good if you're playing it. Again, I'm picturing that this Paladin is one that has high charisma and a lot of healing spells.
Yep.
So you might find some good use.
Yeah. At 15th level, we get Host of Heroes. And this ability basically allows us to, during an hour, which can overlap with a rest, essentially conjure up an effect that is similar to, but not exactly the same as Hero's Feast, which lasts for the next 8 hours. You have to spend a couple gold pieces to do this, and then everyone that eats the food gets advantage on con saves, resistance to poison damage, immune to the frightened condition, and gets 2d10 temporary hit points. So this is basically saying you can cast something that's kind of like Hero's Feast, but not quite Hero's Feast, which technically would stack with Hero's Feast.
Which I think is cool. If you have this Paladin and like a Bard with Hero's Feast or something, and you just throw the best party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Not bad. It's a nice passive buff that applies to your whole party.
At 20th level, You gain Avatar of Nourishment. There's a few different features that happen here when you become the Avatar of Nourishment. At the start of each of your turns, you can hand out temporary hit points to a creature within 30 feet of you, equal to your Charisma modifier. So you're just handing out more extra hit points. As a bonus action, you can also now cast the Revivify spell without expending a spell slot. And it still requires the material components, though. That is one thing to note. And then finally, when a creature within 30 feet of you is damaged, you can hand them out resistance to that damage as a reaction. This is a 20th level feature, so I always have a hard time with these on the Paladin because most campaigns don't make it this high, and if they do, this is a feature that you're only going to use for maybe 2 to 3 sessions. As you
Have
finish.
we ever seen anyone actually use these in a non one shot? I think that even when we've done our 20th level games.
When I played my Vengeance Paladin, we ended at like level 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even make it to 20.
And I think that whenever we've done like level 20 games, everyone has always multi-classed their paladins.
Yeah.
It's just hard to rate these because like they end up being once per day abilities. Like you might see them once in a campaign. So
and that it's so I hate that the Paladin's got a 20th level feature. I wish.
Yeah.
I mean, I everybody needs a 20th level feature, but when it comes to subclasses, I actually preferred if the class had the 20th level feature and the subclasses had more room to play.
I mean, overall, I think the subclass is like a low B, high C.
Yeah, I'm willing to push it into B just because I do think that if you're playing it the way that it's intended to be played, you're not the Paladin going out. I mean, you're still going to smite, but smiting's not your main shtick.
Yeah, there's nothing here that is going to make your smiting as a Paladin better.
You are the Paladin equivalent to the life domain cleric plus food.
Yeah, which not bad.
Yeah.
Not bad. I don't think that this Paladin is so much better at healing compared to another Paladin that it is as transformative to your party strategy as a life domain cleric is.
I do like that this has a lot of ways to dish out temporary hit points.
Yeah.
That feels nice, and healing is boosted. And so if you are relying on those healing spells and you are playing the healer, you're just... We've said many times that healing is not the best thing that you can do in D&D. But a subclass that bolsters that makes it a worthwhile thing, especially on a Paladin who can be a healer.
Well, ironically, like the big thing with this subclass is, again, to take that amazing healing spell that is Aura of Vitality, which Paladins get. They don't get it until they have 3rd level spells, though. So that's kind of the downside here. A couple tweaks to the spell list, such as maybe Healing Word. Paladins don't normally get Healing Word. This would have been a cool place for them to...
I don't understand why Paladins don't get Healing Word.
I kind of do. I feel like it is a bit of a balance thing that they don't. Just that way you're not as... If a Paladin has Healing Word, they kind of are like a one-stop shop for being the support master, right? Yeah, overall, I think that the class could use a little oomph.
Yeah.
In some of the features. And this is one of those cases where, like, if the temporary hit points that it gave out were a little bit more generous, if the ratio of like that I take damage and heal my allies thing were a little bit more favorable, and if the spell list were just had a couple more choice things in there, like one offensive power of some kind, then it would be really good.
Yeah. I think B is safe. I think it's a low B.
Yeah.
But there's potential here.
Yeah.
And I think that you could build a character out of this that's a lot of fun at the table.
I think if you're playing the Paladin and nobody else in your party is bringing any healing whatsoever, and you're playing in a campaign where it's actually really helpful to have it, then, because I have seen that. I have seen some groups where, like, the one player that chose to play the Paladin is now being looked to as the healer for the party because everyone else is playing like rogues, warlocks, and wizards and stuff like that. And so that's one case where the subclass could really, really shine. Whereas, but in a weird way, the aura almost wants to augment someone else's healing power.
Although it can augment yours because you have to be within 10 feet. So you're kind of giving out potions and stuff.
Yeah. And it does work on potions, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, like B- for me.
Next up, we have the Ranger Trapper. As the name implies, this is a ranger who can lay down traps and is good at stalking and hunting their prey and trapping them in snare traps, bear traps, all the different types of traps.
They get Trapper's Tools, so they get proficiency in Thieves' Tools because if you can build traps, you can disarm them. And they also get Trapped Weapons, which is basically an ability that they can choose a weapon or 20 pieces of ammo, and once per turn, they can make that weapon or that ammo explode to deal some extra elemental damage. It's basically you're just extra baseline damage buff that all Ranger subclasses get somewhere.
Yeah, and we love seeing that. You get to choose the damage type, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. So then we get into the meat of this subclass. So this Trapper Ranger, naturally, is going to be building and setting traps. And this is almost an entire new subsystem that is not spellcasting, not maneuvers, but traps. And this class gets both mundane physical traps and magical traps, and you have to build them and prepare them, and then you throw them out as an action, and then they are armed at the start of your next turn. Or you can spend time to like hide your traps and conceal them.
There are also some traps that require a bit more time. You can't just throw them out. We'll get to the traps in a second, but there are some that require actually setting up in a physical space that you need to dedicate time and energy into doing that.
Yeah.
I will say that the set trap section is an entire page of this subclass, this one ability. So we're not going to go word for word over all of it. There's a lot here, but essentially they can build and set traps.
The key thing about this feature is that you have both magical and physical traps that are going to have a variety of effects. The really important thing is that the magical traps often mimic a spell effect, but you have to expend a spell slot to create them, but the spell effect that it creates doesn't require your concentration. And you can, once you put out a magical trap, you can define kind of what type of creature and what size of creature will trigger your traps, but you can also manually trigger your traps as a bonus action or a reaction.
Yeah.
The key part of this whole loop is that in combat, if you want to throw a trap out, which you can throw it out within 30 feet of you, everybody sees you do it.
Yeah.
And so they know the trap is there, and the trap doesn't become armed and active until the start of your next turn. So there's no way for this character to be like, all right, I'm just going to throw down the trap that blows up and just throw it out 30 feet and blow it up right away. You have to throw it out, wait a whole turn, and then on your turn, you can bonus action to manually activate it, or afterwards it will be activated. Me personally, with a lot of these traps, I think that's the play, is throw the trap out and manually trigger it yourself rather than relying on someone else to trigger it by walking into it, at least in combat, unless you're doing that situation where you're able to prepare the environment beforehand.
And this is, I think, the crux of this subclass. We still have more abilities to go through, but I think now is a good time to talk about the fact that this subclass implies that it actually works best on a player who likes to set the stage, do the research. It's very much like that Witcher vibe of like researching who it is or what it is you're hunting, preparing for it, deciding where you're going to lure your enemy to, rigging that area with traps, and then driving them into that space, which is a tactic, but it's not a tactic that everybody uses at their table.
And it's hard when you're the one invading the dungeon, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going into an environment that is someone else's territory, you have to kind of clear a space, set your traps, and then hope that your enemy is going to come to you or retreat or try to leave the dungeon. So it's one of those things where like not every combat encounter is going to allow you to prepare the battlefield beforehand, and the subclass really shines, I think, when you can do that. It's just that that's not always going to be appropriate for every situation, every adventure, or every battle.
More likely you're ending up in combat, kind of spur of the moment, or you're wandering into a dungeon. And the subclass still works in those instances, but it does take that kind of 1-2 punch of the setup and then the execution. So you actually have to take 2 turns when you're in the midst of combat to set up the trap, then deliver the trap.
Yeah, but the traps are really powerful because, again, the magical traps offer certain spells and certain effects in a concentration-free form.
Yeah.
We've got our bear traps that are physical traps that they have to make a strength check to get out of it with piercing damage. There are traps that are just concentration-free entangle and spike growth. There are traps that explode and cause confusion or fire damage or acid damage or cloud kill, basically.
You have nets that can hoist up people, or snare traps. That's kind of the less deadly version of the bear trap.
Or the catapult trap that just, like Bugs Bunny cartoon style, like when Elmer Fudd runs into his own trap and gets launched.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're cool traps.
There's also the ones that you actually have to set up properly are, I think, the pit trap, and I think the catapult trap.
Yeah, the pit trap, you actually have to dig the pit.
Yeah, you have to dig the pit and then conceal it.
Yeah, and then there is also a banishment trap.
Yeah, which,
right?
As it says, you just banish.
And so not all these traps are available to you right away at 3rd level. Some of them are gated between like higher level features, but you essentially learn them all, and they have components and whatnot. So the power is there.
Yeah, and I think the power is there because it requires either the careful setup or the 1-2 punch. So you're either taking 2 of your turns to deliver it, which makes sense because they're super powerful, or you're creating an ambush scenario. Yeah,
and I will just say that this is a very dense ability, so I'm my fingers are crossed that we've got it right. And explaining it, but And if there's some other way of like just being able to immediately throw these traps and have them immediately take effect, that improves the rating dramatically.
Yeah, but I think we've read through it a few times, and I think it's set up that way.
Yeah.
At 7th level, you gain Trapper's Avoidance. I'm thankful that you have this ability. It's basically evasion against traps, so they're not going to blow up in your face as dangerously.
Yeah, and traps have disadvantage against you. At 11th level, you get Leave No Trace. This allows you to expend a spell slot of 1st level or higher when you deploy one of your traps to make your trap invisible.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And you learn invisibility for yourself too. So that can make your traps even harder to find.
Which is great.
Yeah.
At 15th level, we have Booby Trap. I really like this ability. You trap yourself. And it gives you 2 different benefits. There's one that is triggered when you are hit with an attack. And then there's one that's triggered if you are reduced to 0 hit points. You have several different options on the trap that you put on yourself, such as Defibrillate, which shocks people who damage you. And if you're reduced to 0, it shocks you and raises you back up with 1 hit point.
Or there's Entomb, which freezes your body when you're reduced to 0. And there's also the one that just blows you up. It actually doesn't kill you when it blows you up. It just causes you to fail a death save, which is a merciful interpretation.
There's another acid one that when you're damaged, coats your weapons in acid, and then if you're reduced to 0, you spray acid everywhere.
Yeah. So again, there's over a dozen of these traps, with like from the basic bear trap to the high level gravity well and banishment traps. There's a trap that spreads the contagion spell, and I like all of them. I think they're good.
Yeah.
They're potent effects, and so I think that I do feel, though, that I almost by default, the situational nature of this class means that it will excel in a campaign where it has the opportunity to prepare the battlefield and fight on its terms. And that could propel it to feel S tier.
And we've said before that B tier can feel like S tier in the right campaign.
Yeah.
And I think this is almost a poster child for there's things here that feel really good if you can do them. And I'm not saying that it's not even like C tier would be that you rarely get the chance to do them. I think there's a lot of opportunities here to use these abilities. It's just, it takes the right campaign, the right adventure, the right party composition, the right setup.
Yeah.
There needs to be some elements that are working in your favor to properly rig an area with traps and have it go really, really well for you.
Or there needs to be like your party needs to support you and like
battlefield control or movement.
Exactly. Like if you have a party that has like the forced movement features to knock people into your traps so that, because I think one of the biggest things about this subclass is that it is otherwise an action to deploy one of your traps, and then the trap isn't armed until your next turn. And I think that that's the most challenging thing. And if I'm interpreting that correctly, like if it turns out that you can throw the trap out and someone walks into it and it explodes immediately, I think that makes this a much easier class to work with. But it's the fact that the trap doesn't arm until the start of your next turn,
giving everybody a chance to move.
Yeah, that's like everyone knows the trap's there, they can move away from it. And sometimes there's always going to be circumstances where you can throw the trap in a strategic position where the enemy's not going to be able to avoid it.
Yeah, it's
right?
like either, I mean, great for an escape.
Yeah, but I think that the biggest thing is that it asks you to give up an action to throw this trap down, and then hopefully the trap's going to do something big a little bit later.
From years of playing D&D, one thing that I can tell you with absolute confidence is that if you think something on your turn, if you're like, I'm setting up something great for my next turn, by the time you get to your next turn, the battlefield has completely changed. And that, I think, is the main difficulty, is you are setting up an area of effect that doesn't trigger until your next turn. And the battlefield has the potential to change dramatically.
Yeah.
Positioning changes. The amount of times that I think I'm going to set up a perfect fireball and then all my allies get in the way has happened many times. And so what if I throw down the trap and then the battlefield changes in such a way that now if I trigger it, I'm going to hurt my allies. Enemies have moved out of the way. There's a lot that can happen between that.
Yeah.
So I do think this is a B tier because I think it's powerful. I think it has a lot of potential. I think there are great places that this is going to be really awesome. But it takes a kind of player who's very good at planning and the kind of party that can help execute those plans.
There's also a restriction that your magical traps can't be closer than 40 feet to one another.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't do this thing where like when you're preparing the battlefield, it's like, I just put 6 traps right in this one death spot that's just going to like insta-gib whoever walks into this area. Unfortunately, no, you have to spread the traps out a little bit more than that. So yeah, I think I agree with you, Kelly. It's definition of B. Like I could see this character being a lot of fun to play.
Yeah.
And you're still a ranger with a ranger spell list, and like you could still take sharpshooter and crossbow expert and be all that good stuff, and the damage boost is going to be there. So there's nothing bad about this class.
Yeah.
It's just tricky. And that's appropriate for a trapper, but that's kind of like the class itself isn't a trap.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so next we come to a sorcerer subclass. This is the Skinshifter sorcerer. And flavor-wise, it is a little bit of like transmutation magic, but applied to wild magic. Because we're going to kind of be mutating and changing our form unpredictably as we cast our spells. Like all good sorcerer subclasses, we get an expanded spell list right off the bat.
I like to say all good sorcerer subclasses, implying, anyway.
Well, I mean, it's kind of become a core element now of the sorcerers since Tasha's. And so they count as sorcerer spells for us. We learn them automatically. And we can replace them with Biomancy spells, which are a new spell introduced in Helianna's A School of Magic, or transmutation spells from the Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard spell list. So the cool thing about this is that no matter what's on this list, you can switch it out for other transmutation spells, which is going to include really good stuff like Polymorph, Haste, Slow. Basically, the School of Transmutation, you've always got some really good fallbacks. Yeah. In it, so it's always a nice thing to just have there. So on our list, we've got a couple new spells in the book. Chameleon Skin, Zip It, Frog Skin, and Fever Skin. But then we have some old classics like Inflict Wounds, Bark Skin, Protection from Poison, Vampiric Touch, Freedom of Movement, and Greater Restoration. I am switching many of these out for Polymorph, Slow, and Haste.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Out of the spells that I'm very familiar with on this table, most of them are not the most impressive spells in the game. Some of the new spells are pretty cool. I feel like I'd have to try them out to see how they feel. A lot of skin spells, which I guess makes sense for
this is the Skinshifter.
Yeah. So it feels like these spells were made specifically for this subclass, which is fine. Great.
Yeah. So then we get to the real meat of the subclass. The subclass introduced a Skinshift adaptation table, which is a table that you roll a d20 on, but it has 30 things on the table. There's a reason for that. We're going to get into how that works in a moment. But basically, whenever you cast a spell of first level or higher, you roll a d20. If the result of that first roll was then less than 1/3 of your sorcerer level, you then roll on the Skinshift adaptations table. So for example, you cast Fireball. You're a 5th level sorcerer. You roll the dice, and if you roll a 1 or a 2, you then roll on the Skinshift adaptations table another d20 to see what weird mutation manifests on your body.
Out of the 30 options presented here, it should be noted that the first 7 are actually detrimental effects. Most of them involve gaining a vulnerability to a certain damage type, anywhere from elemental damage types to slashing or piercing or bludgeoning damage. So you want to be careful about rolling low. If you roll that 1 or 2, and then you roll another 1 or 2, you might be in a bad situation, not a terrible situation, depending on which vulnerability you get and what combat encounter you're in.
Yeah.
The rest of them slowly and progressively get better and better as they go up. The 8th one is kind of your middle ground where you glow, and then everything after that is more beneficial and they get stronger.
It should be noted that if it triggers randomly on one of your spellcasting, the effect lasts until the end of your next turn. But if you get a good one, you can spend a sorcery point to make it last for 10 minutes. And there are good ones. For example, you can get your flying speed here. You can get resistances to other damage types. And what's interesting is that the way the table is worded is you can only have one of these different resistances at once. So they're all known as like the skin type. So like the paper skin is the one that's going to give you vulnerability to piercing and slashing damage, but you can't have paper skin and steel skin at the same time. Only the most recent one applies. So the steel skin one gets you resistance to slashing damage. So if you happen to get that one, the paper skin goes away and becomes steel skin. And then you say, sorcery point, I'm going to keep this for the next minute. So you get a little bit of flexibility there. The worst thing that's ever going to happen to your character, unlike the wild magic table where you could turn into a potted plant,
or blow up your entire party.
The worst thing that's ever going to happen to you is that you get vulnerability to a damage type, or a -1 penalty to your AC and your speed reduced, or you glow, or you shrink.
Yeah.
Those are the worst things that can happen to you in this table. So there's not going to be anything like you discombobulate into a puddle of ooze and die. It's not that wild of a wild magic table, basically.
Now, this feature gains a lot of potential as soon as you hit 6th level. At level 6, you get Modify Shift. What this does is that now when you roll the d20, you can add half your sorcerer level to the die roll. And what you actually get to do is choose within the window of the die roll plus half your sorcerer level. If you're a 6th level sorcerer and you roll a 10 on the die, you can choose 10, 11, 12, or 13. And you can choose anything within that. So that actually now turns this random table into sort of a sliding window that you get to choose from, and also using your sorcery point to keep a beneficial option. This also means that you're far less likely to land on the detrimental options, because as you gain levels, that window just gets bigger. And so as long as you're not rolling a 1, if you're rolling like a 4 or a 5, you don't have to pick one of the bad ones. You can choose from the good ones. And anything higher than a 7 or 8, and you're golden.
And also at 6th level, as a bonus action, you can spend 1 or more sorcery points to just give yourself anything on the table that is equal to 20 plus half your sorcerer level. So this is the selective shift feature. And so basically what this is spend a couple sorcery points and get a flying speed and your choice of a couple useful resistances. There's a couple other features on this table, but having read over everything, they're pretty random, like tentacle limbs or like acidic skin that damages people that grapple you. And I think me personally, I would just be grabbing the resistances that I want and the flight speed.
I do like the option, though, that if you are fighting that monster like a roper or a kraken and it's grappling you and holding you, and you can just use a sorcery point to be like, haha, acid skin.
Yeah.
Which is nice to have that option to just turn that on. This, I think, is... So 6th level is where this really comes online. Now you have a window to choose from, and you can just spend a bunch of sorcery points. Try not to spend them all.
Yeah.
That's going to be the hard part.
They last 10 minutes. So it's 1 sorcery point for 10 minutes of concentration-free flight. Not a bad deal. And because the flight one isn't one of the incompatible ones, that's not going to go away if you cast another spell. What's also kind of cool here is that we also have the reactive mutations at level 14, where we can now spend a sorcery point to give us resistance to damage when we take it. So by level 14, you don't even need to have the foresight to be like, oh, I should have this damage resistance. You just action it.
So at 18th level, we also gain Shapeshift, and this is just a big transformation that you can do as a bonus action, and it lasts for 10 minutes. You get to pick and choose 6 adaptations that you gain, and if you're currently being grappled, you slip out of it because you're transforming. If you take damage, you also gain resistance to that damage type. Once you use this feature, you can't do so again until you take a short or long rest. So this is your big transformation.
I think this is a good subclass.
Yeah, I think it's got potential. I will say there is some randomness involved, which I generally do like random tables. So I don't know why that makes me be like, oh, I don't get to choose, but you do get to choose as you level up.
You do. You get a lot of choice. And again, the worst thing, this is not like a wild magic table that is going to blow up your entire party. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a really unfortunate damage vulnerability that you can still kind of play around even in that worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Right. So the benefits of getting good resistances and flight and getting an expanded spell list are pretty great. So I think this is like A+. I think even depending on how good you are at managing the problems, it stands up there with the Clockwork Soul and the Aberrant Mind.
I'm giving it less than that.
Okay.
I am going to give it an A.
Okay.
But I don't think A+. I know that really the plus and minuses is more just an opinion thing.
It used to be, though, that any sorcerer subclass that had the expanded spell list feature by our books automatically got that S tier. But I feel like now we've gotten used to that.
We've moved past that.
And yeah.
Here's the only reasons why I'm not giving it an S. 1, until you hit level 6. From levels 1 to 6, this is a... You don't have any choice. You're just... maybe mutating, which also feels like the chance of me using my features is low. And when I do use them, the chance of it being detrimental is still low, but higher. Once I hit level 6, everything comes online in a really big way. The other thing that I think is just pushing this down for me is every ability that you are given asks you to spend sorcery points.
Yeah, that's true.
And so you need to be very careful on your management of sorcery points, because I could want 3 different abilities. So I spend 3 sorcery points at 6th level. Oh, I want to hold on to one of those for longer than a turn. I now need to spend another sorcery point. Oh, I just took damage. I'm going to turn it into resistance for not like everything's asking for sorcery points. I could blow through them very quickly.
Yeah, but this is my counterpoint to that is the only thing I care about here is concentration free flight for 1 sorcery point. Like, I feel like if you just accepted the randomness, but bought yourself the concentration free flight and nothing else, and took the expanded spell list to the bank and traded in your favorite your favorite transmutation and biomancy spells, I think you're laughing all the way to the bank. You don't need to do any of this other fancy business. You're just kind of dealing with you're dealing with the shifting skin as it happens, but you don't care. You got wings.
I'm not arguing with your positive points. That's why it's an A.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's an S.
Okay.
Next up, we come to the Warlock, which has the subclass the Parasite. This is a parasite that lives inside of you and changes your body in many ways. Very interesting. This actually feels a similar theme to the Warlock that we created, the Flesh.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a popular concept. I think this idea of a warlock being inhabited or possessed. I think we've seen it in a couple of Grim Hollow things too. It's a cool idea.
Let's be real. We're all fans of Venom and the Thing.
Yeah.
And there's Venom and the Thing vibes in that theme. It's a parasite that lives in you and gets to like change you and warp you.
Yeah. So we got an expanded spell list here. As all warlocks do. Remember, you don't get these automatically. You have to choose them normally from your level up. And there's a little bit of a disclaimer for this subclass because it says that some of the spells here feel divine in their nature, but to reflavor them as being created by an alien parasite. Because we got heroism and sanctuary. We got enhance ability and large reduce. Then we got haste and spirit guardians, black tentacles and freedom of movement, and then finally contagion and dominate person. I like the spell list.
There's some great options.
I like spirit guardians on a warlock.
Yeah, we've done that too.
Yeah.
It's so much fun, especially when you have the invocations to push and pull.
Yeah.
Can be a lot of fun. Black Tentacles is on point here. Dominate Person is great. Contagion's great. Haste is great.
Yeah.
Enhance Ability and Enlarge Reduce, both great. Yeah, it's a good spell list. I would pick most of these if I was playing a warlock. You also gain Parasitic Weapon. This is a weapon created by your parasite that you can actually launch at enemies at a range that is 5 times your proficiency bonus.
Yeah, and it's a melee spell attack.
Yeah,
so
it's almost like you're whipping with your parasitic pendulum.
There's been a bunch of video games too where
what are they called? There's that one where you're the parasite guy.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting. I'm drawing a blank here. I'll remember it after we're done filming. It's the video game where you have like a parasite inside of you and you're jumping from building to building and like.
Yeah, they're great. So I think it captures the feeling and it makes as many attacks as you would with Eldritch Blast, but does D12 damage.
Yeah.
What's cool here is that it becomes magical at 6th level, and there's a little sidebar that says, allow any Eldritch Blast invocations to work with this.
First of all, that sidebar should have come earlier. It's actually at the very end of this subclass. So we didn't see that until we had read through the whole thing. And as soon as we saw it, we were like, oh, wow, that's great. So applying that knowledge, yeah, there's a lot that you can do here with, again, if you have Spirit Guardians and you have the ability to pull...
Grasp of Hadar.
Yeah, Grasp of Hadar to pull targets into your Spirit Guardians. Or if they're in your Spirit Guardians and they're taking damage, you can push them back out to make them have to come back in. I would take all of the invocations to move and damage more with my with my last
Grasp of Hadar, Lance of Lethargy, Repelling Blast, and then it says like Agonizing Blast adds to the damage. So it's a D12. So you're giving up the range.
Yeah.
Right? Of Eldritch Blast to get a little bit more damage, and it becomes a melee spell attack, which means that if someone is right up to you, you don't have disadvantage on your attack rolls with it because it's still a melee attack. Its reach at lower levels is going to be pretty small. So 10-foot reach to begin with, then a 15-foot reach, eventually a 30-foot reach though.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, right.
Still at first level, you also gain symbiotic reinforcement, which allows you to turn some of your symbiotic parasite into a shield. As you increase in level, so at 10th level, this shield actually gains potency and becomes a shield of 3 AC instead of 2.
Yeah, not bad. At level 6, you can turn yourself into goop and just squeeze through things that are like basically melt down your body to squeeze through gaps up to 6 inches. So this is kind of just having like an amorphous form ability. But you can also use your parasite to summon a familiar through the Find Familiar spell. And you actually have a unique stat block for this familiar. It's a parasitic ooze. It does a little bit of damage. It has an amorphous form, but it also has hit points equal to 5 plus 3 times your warlock level.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty resilient little familiar.
At 10th level, we get Transmit Parasite, and now our parasitic ooze can run around and latch onto other creatures and do all sorts of new things. You can detonate your ooze. So that's fun. And if you don't feel like blowing up your enemies, you can also latch your ooze onto your allies, and it kind of works as a temporary shield for them. So if they're hit, it takes the damage instead of them.
And finally, at 14th level, you gain a virulent form, which allows you to kind of like go full venom. You become large. You get temporary hit points at the start of each of your turns. The damage of your parasitic weapon goes up, and it scores critical hits on a 19 to 20. And whenever you get attacked by anybody that's in the reach of your weapon, you can attack them back. So overall, I love the flavor. It oozes with flavor, if you will.
This subclass has a lot of venom to it, you know?
Yeah. I think this is all about the kind of the parasitic weapon as Eldritch Blast.
Yeah.
It makes it a weird sort of take on a Hexblade in a unique way. And I do wonder if the fact that it is a melee spell attack that you can make extra attacks with means that this thing is going to have some interesting multi-classing potential, or if it's more geared towards sticking with it. And because there's some interesting things about like what happens if you use this with Pact of the Blade and try to augment it with Pact of the Blade. You could, I wonder if there's some sort of like melee warlock alt build that is in this.
I like this.
Yeah.
I actually, this is I'm reading through it again here on camera. I actually like it more than the first time I read through it.
Yeah. I think it's got like pulling people into your spirit guardians.
It's got a lot of potential and it feels cool. Like Eldritch Blast already feels cool. And what this subclass is saying is you don't lose the potency of Eldritch Blast. You're just replacing it with a different theme.
It's a shorter range.
Shorter range, but it feels really cool. It feels like I get to be Venom and like bound into combat and like start lashing at people and pulling them around. The Spirit Guardians feels really on point here. Definitely take it. It also has its own invocation that is added here called Parasitic Leech, that now when you damage people with your parasitic abilities, you gain hit points back.
When you kill them.
Yeah. So I think that that's also really cool.
That combined with the shield means that you're going to be a little bit more resilient, given that you're going to be in closer quarters.
And I mean, yeah, I think you can play a pretty good skirmisher.
Yeah, I think I'd give this an A-.
Yeah, I'm willing to do that too.
Yeah, I think there's a build. I think the big thing here is going to depend on, like, it also notes that the familiar can work with the Pact of the Chain.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how the weapon, the parasitic weapon, might interact with the Pact of the Blade.
Right.
Right? Because if you can use things like Life Drinker and add your charisma modifier twice to this, then it gets really strong.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also because it's a melee spell attack, like what kind of feat, like it doesn't work with like Great Weapon Master or anything like that, but like just are there things that you can do with this potentially, because it is a melee spell attack that isn't a cantrip, it isn't a spell. Like, what could it interact with?
You know, thinking about that, I think what's really cool here is they've designed a subclass that has both a familiar component and a melee combat component,
Yeah.
lending itself to either Pact of the Blade, Pact of the Chain. Pact of the Tome just already is what it is.
Yeah.
They don't need to add anything. So any pact that you choose feels like it adds to this subclass.
Yeah. A- for me. Yeah. So finally, we got the new wizard subclass, the School of Biomancy. And you are a Biomancy savant. So certain spells that are in other schools are classified as Biomancy spells for you. So these are a whole new class of spells that were introduced in Helianna's guide. They all kind of feel like spells that interact with biology, metabolism, physiology. So it's kind of a subset of transmutation and necromancy in a little weird way. We got like Flesh to Stone and Simulacrum in here. We got Shape Change. We got False Life. We got Alter Self. We got Stone Skin and such. So these are all kind of spells that are modifying the body in some way, shape, or form. So again, this is your standard like wizard thing where you can more easily add these biomancy spells to your spellbook.
At second level, we also gain biostimulation. So when you cast a biomancy spell at first level or higher, you can either direct them at yourself or your targets. So I guess if you are bestowing a beneficial spell upon an ally, you can also heal them.
Yeah, at level 6 you gain self-improvement, and basically for an hour you can literally improve your body with new biology and new physiology, and you get this big list of different things, and you can choose one of them, and then at higher levels you can choose 2, eventually 3 of these things. These are all sorts of things like a prehensile tail, or a third leg, noticing a theme here, or firefly skin or dark vision through owl eyes. So there's a bunch of different like little minor perks, +1 bonus to AC. Most notably, there is no flight.
Ooh. But it is cool. You can kind of choose your adaptations. This seems to be a theme with a lot of these subclasses, is the adaptation, the changing of the body, things like that. So you get a pretty long list here. And yeah, pick and choose your favorites. At 10th level, you gain Spell Splitter. So I like to call this the twin spell with an asterisk on it. And that asterisk is that when you cast a spell that does not target yourself, that targets a single creature, you can also choose to have it target yourself as well. So it is kind of like twin spell, but the person you're twinning it to has to be you. Again, beneficial for a handful of spells that you would be casting on your allies. Things like Fly, or Invisibility, or Haste.
Or Polymorph.
Yeah, so you can double it up and include yourself in that spell.
Yeah. And then at 14th level we gain Endocrine, I hope I'm saying that right, Overload. And this is kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde power. You're making a little pill that you store in your brain and use your brain muscles to crush. And
how do you use your brain muscles? Use your brain muscles. Clench your brain.
Flex your brain.
I'm flexing everything else. I don't know how to flex my brain.
And then you basically choose whether you want to be the brawny form or the scrawny, not the brawny or the scrawny. But it is.
It's like the swift or the brute.
Yeah, or the brute.
But I like brawny and scrawny.
Brawny and scrawny. Yeah, so the brute form increases your strength to match your intelligence, makes you large in size.
You got a new appendage.
You get a new appendage that you can use to make melee attacks with.
Cool.
So we got a prehensile tail, we got a third leg, we got an extra appendage. Honestly, the subclass is it all. It's got everything.
It's got everything you need.
It's got
right
all
there.
the extras.
The 3 core requirements for a subclass in our books.
Yeah. Lets you attack twice, gives you temporary hit points, not bad. The scrawny or the swift form lets you cast cantrips with a casting time of an action as a bonus action.
Cool.
And you're permanently hasted.
Yeah.
The effect when you crush the pill, it lasts for a minute, basically, and then you're exhausted at the end of the minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also got a bonus to your AC.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Not bad.
So Cool.
This is kind of like a tuned up transmuter wizard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel about the same way about this as I do about the transmuter wizard, which is like it's a solid B.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong here. It's fun. It's great. I will say I love the artwork. I know that it's a half orc, but you get very classic witch vibes from the artwork, which I kind of like.
Yeah. I think the key thing is making the most out of the twin spell feature.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, I almost feel like you're playing a support and buff wizard.
Yeah, it's just weird because there's not a lot of spells. Oddly enough, like there's a few.
The Biomancy school has more.
Yeah, and I think that like aside from things like maybe fly and polymorph, like because really I would love to cast haste on 2 other party members. Like there's a fair amount of spells that you'd rather be able to cast on 2 party members rather than yourself and another party member. So you have to find that like very specific grouping of spells, like fly and polymorph, that it's like it's really good on someone else and it's good on you too.
I think it is important to note though that you and I are mentally often defaulting to the spells that we know and love, but Biomancy has a whole list of spells that you could bestow on another person and could benefit yourself as well. So I think they're really trying to say, hey, this works best if you're taking a bunch of spells in this book.
Yeah.
So you will take that handful of useful spells that we know and love, and you'll also want to carefully examine the Biomancy school here, because there's some great options.
Yeah, overall, I think there's a lot of really flavorful and thematic subclasses in Helianna's Guide to Monster Hunting. I think that the nice thing about a lot of these subclasses is that I'm not really seeing anything that is super game breaking in them,
or terrible,
and nothing that is super bad either. A lot of the subclasses fall into this really nice, good flavor without overpowering too much. Some of them I feel could have a little bit more oomph to them.
Yeah.
But I love the concepts behind them.
I feel like most of the subclasses that we looked at in this book landed in the B to A category, which is perfect. That's where you want to live. There were a couple C's, and I think we gave 1 S.
And we might have had something that was like a little bit on the D side.
But generally, it was all good.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks a lot to the design work here. One thing that I did notice, Helianna's Guide loves subclasses that have paragraphs and paragraphs of options available to them. Yeah. I love a subclass with options. I did find I was a little overwhelmed at first reading some of these subclasses, but as you start to examine them, it all starts to kind of piece together.
Helianna's is a big book. It's 600 pages. There's a lot of extra systems. There's a lot of extra rules. There's a lot of extra things that are going on. So it makes sense that all the subclasses are a little extra as well. And so that's why, like, I think that it's really worthwhile when you're going to use these in your game, really give over everything a good view, because as we saw in reviewing these subclasses, there's the crafting system that's in Helianna's, there's the new Biomancy spells, there's a lot of these extra bits of rules that latch into these subclasses that can really kick them up.
Not to mention the subclasses themselves sometimes introduce entirely new rule sets that require an entire page of explanation, which can be a lot, but can be really fun if you're willing to bite it off.
Yeah. So be sure to check that all out as well. If you enjoy these subclasses and are using them in your games, let us know what you think about them in the comments below.
And if you disagree with any of our rankings or have tried some of these subclasses at your table, tell us which ones you've tried and which ones you loved in the comments below as well.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron. The links are right down below.
And don't forget to check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings right here on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more tier ranking videos for D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
In the dungeon.